Every time I do this, I feel like I'm forgetting something. But if I forget something, oh well, we forgot it. Oh well. Today I'm joined with my Uncle Rob, who is a photographer. And how long have you been a photographer?
Oh gosh, I've been sort of seriously doing it on and off since the 80s.
The 80s.
Michael John's here. Yeah, Michael John's here.
The 80s, that's when you started pursuing it to try to monetize it, or?
No. I haven't. I didn't even think about trying to monetize it until this year, until really recently, last summer. So it was just I took up film photography with a SLR back in the 80s. Still have it.
Okay, I was in art school, I promise. But what's an SLR? I know it's the type of camera, but what is SLR?
SLR stands for single lens reflex.
Ah.
So it's basically just it was the main type of professional style or serious hobby style camera. They also call them ILCs, or interchangeable lens camera. So versus what's called a point and shoot, which is a small little, you just take it out of your pocket and press the trigger and you
reload it, or not necessarily.
Yeah, well, the film cameras you did, you had a film cartridge, and but I had cameras going back to, I think I had my dad's old camera when I was a teenager, and funny thing, I actually took some Polaroids. I had a Polaroid camera back in the 70s. You know what a Polaroid was?
The ones that you shoot and then it takes 2 minutes to...
It doesn't. No, it takes about 30 seconds, and then it just creates the print, and it was quite the thing.
Yeah, my grandma had one of those on the other side of the family, and we always loved playing with that.
Yeah.
Just seeing us come to life on the little printout.
So I still have I have a little well, not catalog's the wrong word, but photo book of some Polaroids I took with your Aunt Marcia and your Uncle Don, and doing various different funny poses. I'll have to show it to you sometime. I actually have them online.
When y'all were adults or kids?
No, we were teenagers.
Oh, that would be cool to see.
In Baltimore, and I would just do these weird, just for fun, just kind of, it wasn't, typically you're taking snapshots of family events and portraits and, whatever, but I would do set up things like Don had one where he had ketchup for blood, and like he was acting like he was dead, and Marcia, she was looking like she was a hippie, and all these kind of just weird, just having fun with the camera. And I've always enjoyed taking interesting pictures. And then, after I got out of college, I got a little bit more serious with it. Got a single lens reflex SLR. Still have it. It's a Minolta. And I really got into, at that time, I got particularly interested in the macro photography, which is filming little tiny things like flowers. So Barbara and I would go on these hikes, and she would tease me about, are we going on a hike or are we going on a photo?
No, it's a hike. It's a hike. I just happen to have my camera.
Yeah, we're going to stop every 5 feet and take pictures of the flowers and the mushrooms.
But it's a hike.
But it's a hike. We didn't hike. It was more like a stroll. That's what she called it, a stroll. Are we going on a hike or a stroll?
I'm sure she was a good sport about it.
She is, and still is to this day. She'll even still ask, are you, are we going on a stroll or are we going on a hike? And
I just need to know what shoes to put on.
That's right. And you bring, am I bringing my camera? It's a stroll. But if it's a hike, then I'm not bringing my camera.
That's funny.
So I got it, and in recently, like over the last several months, I've kind of dug through that. Most of that photography was, I quickly gravitated towards slide film instead of print film. And there's some technical reasons why I did that back in the day, but I still have boxes and boxes of old slides that I'm now going through and scanning and putting online. And I don't know if you saw it or not, but for Stephen's birthday party in September, I went through and found a lot of old slides of him as a baby and as a youngster.
I think I did see that on your...
So those were old slides that I scanned and then cleaned up because they got dust on them.
I was wondering how you got them online.
You scan them, and the scanner, you put them like 4 in a tray, and it automatically creates 4 images, and then you can bring them into Photoshop and clean them up, the dust spots and whatnot. So I'm kind of in the process. It's a slow process because it just takes a while, but a lot of the what I would have at the time considered art photography, like the flowers, it's not really good enough because the slides have deteriorated over the years. But it's still, that was my interest back then. And then, you know, it kind of waned and didn't really do much with it. And then, you know, I did still other point and shoot cameras, film, what are called APS-C cameras. I did them in the early 2000s, and they would create negatives and positives, and still have some of those. And all of those have been digitized. So, so they're all available online because, you know, eventually that film will deteriorate, but the digital copies will remain.
So you shoot and edit your photos. Do you like both processes, the shooting and the editing? Because I know some people don't like editing.
To some extent, I don't particularly like going all the way to Photoshop. But I do like taking what I've got, the digital images, and enhancing them because, you know, dynamic range and, you know, increasing contrast or saturation or some special effect that I want to do. Very few of my images have I actually gone into Photoshop and done something dramatic to them. Some of that I did.
What other software do you use other than Photoshop for?
Lightroom. I use primarily Lightroom because it'll do most of my, I do 95% of my actual editing within Lightroom, which is essentially, Lightroom's primary purpose is a catalog program. So
what does that mean?
That means it creates a database of where they are. So if I want to go in, it's what's called, it's a type of software called a DAM.
Okay.
Okay, it's DAM software, Digital Asset Manager, DAM.
Okay.
It's a category of software that, all right, so this music that's on Mike's shelf here, all these CDs.
Okay, we have a shelf full of CDs.
All right, you would want to, if you wanted to keep track of all of that music in a database, you know what a database is, of course.
Right.
So that's what a DAM is. It's a database, essentially. Okay. So you create a catalog of your music, or a catalog of your digital assets. Digital assets being music or images or videos or PDFs or Word documents or whatever digital assets you have, you can catalog them in a digital asset manager. Lightroom is just very specialized specifically for images, primarily photographs. But
are you able to, I guess, sort them? So I guess maybe with each picture, so you go shoot scenery at the mountains.
Yeah.
You can then label all those pictures as like landscapes,
yep.
and then you can tag them. Tag them by the date and the
tag them by date, where they were taken, category, color scheme, people that are in them.
That's cool.
So just to give an example, what you can do with something like Lightroom, and it's not the only one. It's one of a number of programs that'll do that, but Lightroom is the one I've chosen. It's an Adobe product. So for Stephen's party, all I had to do, I've got literally thousands. I've got probably over 10,000 images in my catalog, scattered all over my hard drives. Okay, well they're all in one place.
Never mind.
Okay, no.
Wow, 10,000 is a lot.
Total, I've got
okay.
Thousands of images.
Okay.
And probably several hundred, probably 400 or 500 that have Stephen in them in some way. Okay, that have been tagged with he's in them. Well, if you try to pull, so within Lightroom, you just go in and say, give me every picture that has Stephen in it, and you put that in a collection, and then within that collection, I can then go in and say, okay, which ones are 3-star, 4-star, because I don't really want to. I don't want to show the 1-star or 2-star. I just want to see the 3-star, 4-star images that have Stephen in them, and I can. It's a filter. Basically, it's a filter.
Okay.
And so I can create a collection, and then that collection I can then upload to SmugMug, which is my photography website, grafton.photos, which you've seen.
Yeah, and it's really cool, and like, I think it's cool that you basically have a portfolio set up online, and people that like those photos can then just get a blown up picture and put it on their wall, which is really
so they could go in and so I can easily so Lightroom, one of the things I like about Lightroom is it's got a really nice plug-in for SmugMug. So I don't have to manage the stuff on SmugMug. All I have to do is manage these collections within Lightroom, and automatically, well, not automatically, just say publish these to SmugMug in its own gallery. Wow. So I could create a gallery just for Stephen's birthday party.
That's amazing.
I did one for Amber's birthday party.
In my head, because I did see that the gallery of Stephen's birthday, and in my head I was like, oh, I guess he just had to go sort and find all of these. But it took
a fraction of a second once I built the query. I just said go in and say, it's just like any database query. You just say I want every picture that has Stephen in it. So now that requires when you...
Does it do face recognition?
It does. It does. So that was the first thing I did, is make sure that all my face recognition, because that's a new feature in Lightroom that was added about 2 or 3 years ago. Okay. So some of the stuff I added many years ago didn't have that tagged. So, and I may have missed some, but the way to make Lightroom work is when you ingest them, when you import those images into Lightroom, a lot of the effort is tagging them. So when I do a shoot, so my most recent shoot was Barb and I went to Hard Labor Creek State Park in Georgia on January 1st, the first day hike. I think I posted those on Facebook. So when I get back from a shoot, I will bring all the images into Lightroom, and then I'll tag them with location data.
About how many images do you usually have that you're
depends on the shoot. That one was probably 50? 30.
30.
That was a light shooting day for me.
Okay.
Costa Rica. So Costa Rica was a week, and I have 5,000 images. I've only gone through the first 1,500.
In Costa Rica, I know you told me this off camera, but Costa Rica, you went just to shoot.
Just to shoot wildlife.
It makes sense that you would have 5,000.
Yeah, I mean, every day, when you're paying, it was an expensive trip, but we're also paying for the professional photographer to be there, and also the other guides. So we want to maximize our time photographing, and so we went with a professional photographer with professional guides. So we knew where all the monkeys were, and we knew where all the stuff was.
That's cool.
And they could spot the sloths in the tree. And anyway, so every day I took about 1,000 pictures.
That's amazing.
And so then you have the process, which is very time consuming, especially when it's that many. The Hard Labor Creek shoot was 30, 50 pictures. I could do that in 45 minutes. But you still have to get them off your camera. Put them on your computer, bring them into Lightroom, catalog. Basically, you import them into the catalog, because Lightroom doesn't know they're there until you import them into the catalog. And then once it imports them, then it knows where they are on your hard drives. It doesn't dictate where they go. I dictate where they go. It just knows that they're on the D drive in this folder, whatever. And then I tag them. There's this process of, so I'm pretty anal about the tagging. I put GPS coordinates on them, so I know exactly where they were taken. So if you go to SmugMug and you say, where was this picture, it's actually in the info screen. It'll have GPS coordinates on almost every.
And all of that from SmugMug is just pulled from your tagging
pulled from the tagging in Lightroom.
That is so cool.
So people or animals, I do genus species. I've been doing that more recently. So if I know the genus species, I'll put that in there. So that's taggable. The common name, scarlet macaw or whatever.
It's really cool.
And you can do things like you can say if I wanted to, I could say dominant colors. So if I'm doing a project and I want pictures that have orange as the dominant color, you could tag them that way. So there are a lot of things you can do because it's a database, and you're just basically creating queries or filters to say, show me every picture that I have in my entire 10,000 plus, library of butterflies, and then that's several hundred, and then of those, which are the best? The ones that I've said are, 3-star or above.
That's really neat.
Or which ones are the swallowtail?
This is
which
so
one
cool
is the this genus, or which one? Show me all the herons. I can go in and pull up just the herons if I want. Or I can pull up just seagulls, or if I can pull up just raptors.
This is so funny we're having this conversation right now, because I literally just came home from my mom's, and I hadn't imported a whole lot of pictures like that in a while. So what I just did at my mom's, she had a camera, she took pictures of the first pickleball tournament that I hosted, and then other events like that I wanted pictures from. Well, I got all the pictures from her camera, but it's like 1,000 pictures.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this is cool to have, but every time I'm gonna want to look for something, it's gonna take me an hour to find
them.
And now,
you just need a digital asset manager.
Yeah, I need to figure out Lightroom.
And Lightroom's just one of many tools that does that. I've tried several others because I don't like what I don't like about Lightroom is the subscription model. I hate it.
Yeah. Have you ever used GIMP?
GIMP is not a cataloging program. It's an image editor only, and I have used GIMP.
What's a good free?
Well, there's one called Darktable, which you should look at. It's really not geared primarily toward Windows. It's really geared more toward Linux, but they have a Windows installation. I just started exploring that recently, but it's open source. There are a number of other cataloging programs that aren't free, but they don't require subscription. They're just perpetual license. I also own a subscription, I own a license for another DAM called iMatch. So if you just want cataloging and you don't want to pay the subscription for an Adobe product, you can look at iMatch. And there's a number of other ones too.
Is iMatch means it's for iMac or not?
No, it's actually a Windows program.
Oh, is it?
Yeah, it's Windows, and it's not for so I don't know what your hardware is.
I use Windows mostly.
So if it's Windows, iMatch is Windows only. That's just the name of it. It's iMatch. The name of the company is Photools. But in any case, if you have a cataloging program for your images, then it makes it orders of magnitude easier to find what you're looking for.
I'm definitely going to look into this because I'm starting to get to that point where I'm getting
you just get too much.
Too many photos.
Where are they? I know. I took
Yeah.
these pictures in. I seem to remember taking some pictures in Gainesville of those trains. Where are they? What was that 2015 or what? Because I have mine sorted by year. Well, if you forget what year you took them in, then that's no help. But in Lightroom or whatever the damn it doesn't have to be that one. You just say, show me all the pictures taken in Gainesville, Georgia, or Gainesville, Florida, or Waco, or Lorena. I could easily go in. It'd take me a minute, and I could pull up every photograph I've taken in Lorena, Texas.
You've convinced me.
Anyway, so that's
yeah, I definitely.
So there's a process.
Tagging my photos.
So kind of back to square one. Photography is back to your original question. I love shooting, but I also enjoy the process. It's called a workflow. You have and you develop a consistent workflow after your shoot, so that certain things happen and you don't get it out of order. You got to get the images off your card onto your computer so that they're backed up. Got to make sure they're backed up. Got to rename them, or if you do, I always rename mine. Have a pattern that I use. You have to store them in a certain order. You have to bring them into the catalog, and then there's a process called culling. So if you take, so you bring 100 images in, out of which only a dozen or so are worth really sharing. And so you have to go through and decide which one are keepers, usually a star system or a flag system or whatever system you want to use.
Do you throw them any out, or do you just tag them one star?
In most cases, I keep, for me to actually delete them, they have to be like a complete mistake, like I hit the shutter and I was pointing at the corner of the wall or something.
That makes
or
sense.
If they're so out of focus and completely unusable, like I will almost discarded that image of the train I was showing you because it was so out of focus. I almost deleted it in camera because that's typically what I do. If it's that out of focus, I'll just discard it.
So there was a picture of a train from Uncle Rob's book that he made.
Should I show
Christmas.
it to him? Get the book out. Should have brought the book.
It was a
zoom it in.
It was a picture of a train that you had set up for your camera was set up. You knew the train was about to pull out.
It's a steam locomotive, steam train. Yeah.
It was a really cool steam train, and then you took the picture. It was not completely, but basically completely
very much out of focus. Yeah.
And something in your shutter or your lens was
off.
off.
The lens setting was not right.
Lens setting was off. and that's the photo that you almost discard, and then you go to editing. You're like, hey, this is kind of neat how it looks.
Because it looks kind of old timey.
What I would call a happy mistake.
Yeah, that was definitely a happy mistake. But my typical process, to answer your question, I normally will discard completely unusable images, and a lot of times I'll do that in camera. It's called chimping. It's just after you take some shots, while you're waiting for some other shot to happen, you go in and just go, okay, well that's terrible, and delete. So you delete them in camera, because when you create a backup, you're creating a backup of all your bad pictures too. Then you got to delete those. So I try to only bring into the computer pictures that might be usable, not ones that I know won't.
That makes sense.
So then, but the whole process of culling is really a computer process. So you can put up on, using Lightroom or whatever tool you're using, you put 2 or 3 of them up on, say, oh, well, this set, it's the same essential shot, but of that set, this is the best one. And the rest of them are single star or no star, and the other one is a 3-star. Something has to be really good to be a 5-star in my book. It has to be good. To me, a 5-star image has to be something that I would be proud to print and put on a wall.
I kind of used a system. I basically used a similar system to that when I imported pictures from my phone. My phone was getting too full memory, and it was time that I needed to put the phone pictures on my computer. And as I did that, I ended up making a separate folder, like these are keeper photos, and these are photos that I will probably get rid of or do something with later.
Well, the nice thing about the DAM is that you don't have to move them. You can keep all of them in the shoot folder. So you have a shoot, so like Hard Labor Creek, it's a good example, it's the most recent one. There might be 100 pictures in there that I took. Of the 100, there might only be, I think I posted probably 15 or 20, okay? The rest of them, they're still there. I didn't move them anywhere, but the only ones that actually got published to SmugMug, or the ones that within Lightroom or in a keeper catalog, are the ones that are 3-star or 4-star or whatever. So you don't have to move them around, because now everything gets fragmented. It's all done within your catalog program, and you create all these collections. So every good digital asset manager allows you to create collections by certain filters or criteria.
That's
by
really
star,
cool.
by pick flag, by who's in it, who's not in it. All and you can get as anything you can do in a database, you can do with a digital asset manager.
I'm glad I learned that today.
Yeah. So
I want to ask you. I know you just said you've been around cameras, interested in it pretty heavily since the 80s, so almost coming on 40 years now, and you've had a lot of different cameras. For a beginner photographer nowadays, what would you suggest? Just someone wanting to get into the hobby. Say you 40 years ago,
all right,
now.
So here's what I would recommend. There's a few minimal requirements in order to get a camera that you would be proud to own. But before I answer that question, let me just go a little bit of a different direction. From a photographic standpoint, the cameras in our cell phones are so good right now, you can take some pretty darn good pictures with them.
Interesting.
However, there's a couple, things that make them unsuitable for serious photographer, in my opinion. One is the sensor is too small, so you lose two things: resolution and dynamic range, which are very technical terms. But there's no way you can get dynamic range.
What's dynamic range for a beginner?
Okay, I'll come back to that.
Okay.
So you lose dynamic range and resolution because the sensor is this big instead of that big. Okay, so a typical, I have two cameras, two digital SLRs. One is what's called full frame, which means the sensor, full frame, is the same approximate size as a 35 millimeter film was back in the day. It's 35 millimeters diameter. Not diameter, diagonal. Okay. So the aspect ratio is approximate. I don't remember what it is, but it's anyway diagonally, like you measure a TV screen, is the 35 millimeters.
Okay.
That's full frame.
I never knew that's what that meant.
So 35 millimeters is full frame. Then they have what's called a crop frame, which is a 1.5 crop. So I have but one of each, and they serve different purposes. But even my crop frame, which has a smaller sensor, and I can show you all this online, but it is a smaller sensor than full frame, is still at least 3 times larger than the sensor in your camera, in your cell phone.
Oh. Huh.
So what they do with cell phones, and so this is kind of leading back to your original question with dynamic range. What they're doing with cell phones is they're compensating for the small sensor and the fact you have a fixed lens, because you can't just, change the lens, put a zoom lens on there.
Right.
Is they're doing digital enhancements. So for example, to increase resolution, sometimes what some of the newer cameras are doing is taking multiple shots and overlaying them to increase dynamic range and resolution. So let me answer your question about what dynamic range is. So what dynamic range is tells you how big a range from dark to light can we differentiate. The human eye can differentiate what's called about 20 stops of light. Now a stop is, think of, so we have an amount of light in here, okay, that our eye naturally adjusts to it to do whatever we do to see, okay. If we look at an image, and an image, a photographic image, its exposure is a function of how much light is coming in. Properly exposed image is a certain amount of light on the sensor, whether that's film or electronic sensor. All right, so if you cut that amount of light in half by either cutting down the size of the aperture, so your aperture is this big, okay, imagine you have, okay, the aperture of the lens is this big.
A couple inches in diameter.
All right, and we cut that in half. We have decreased the stop of light by 1 stop. 1 stop of light is half or twice. It's doubling or halving the amount of light. Okay, so our aperture is this big, and we then want to make it smaller. So now we change that by 1 stop. That's just a photographic term. Okay. If we cut it again in half, that's another stop. Our eye, the human eye, can adjust or differentiate 20 stops of light.
Wow.
Even the best digital SLRs today can only do about 16 stops of light differentiated. Your cell phone can probably only do about 12. So in other words, think of a digital image, so a pixel is, what a pixel is,
yeah.
on the sensor picks up 1 pixel. It basically reads from 0 to whatever, how many bits it is. So imagine it's, 8 bits, so 255 different ways you can measure that amount of light. Okay, the sensitivity or the ability to differentiate dark to light is a function of dynamic range. So in music, dynamic range is how much different between the loudest and the softest parts of music can we reproduce. That's dynamic range in music. In photography, dynamic range is how much information can we differentiate between fully exposed, saturated white to fully black. So the less of that we can differentiate, the lower the dynamic range. So what a cell phone does is through programming increases the apparent dynamic range, but the sensor has a built-in dynamic range because of its physical size. It can only take in so much information. Obviously, a larger sensor can take in more information, therefore it can have increased dynamic range.
So is it basically edit the image as you're taking
It sort of is. It sort of is. In some cases it's editing, in other cases it's doing some other other tricks. Like, and the way it increases resolution, which is how many pixels per inch it can actually differentiate is by taking multiple images and doing what's called pixel shifting. And some of the new DSLRs are doing pixel shifting as well. And you can triple or quadruple your resolution by doing some tricks like pixel shifting. Now my cameras won't do that, but.
So back to what would a beginner buy?
Okay, so good questions. Thanks for bringing me back to.
No, that's okay. I do that.
This is what I would recommend for a beginning photographer. I would get a interchangeable lens camera. So you'd have the ability to change lenses. That's a must.
Okay.
In order for you to do full zoom or be able to change lenses is huge.
So, and with that, 2 lenses minimum or 3 lenses?
I'd start with one. Just start with one. Okay. And then find out what kinds of things you like to shoot. And then you add lenses to your collection based on what you like to shoot. So, for example, when I went to Costa Rica, I actually rented a lens because it's a $12,000 lens. Wow. No point in me buying a $12,000 lens, but it was a lens that I specifically needed to shoot in under canopy, fast-moving animals. So it made sense for me to rent it for 2 weeks.
So a beginner would just need to have the access to be able to attach different lenses.
Yes, but if you can't take the lens off, then that's not even an option.
Right.
So so criteria number 1 would have to be an interchangeable lens camera. So beyond that, the only other requirement that I would put on it is that it must be able to shoot RAW. Okay. Now most ILCs, interchangeable lens cameras, can shoot RAW, but I would make sure that it does.
RAW?
Okay, so I knew he was going to ask that question.
You read my mind.
Okay, so what is RAW? So you're probably familiar with a JPEG.
Right.
Okay, so you're probably familiar in the music world of MP3s. All right, well, an MP3, as you know, or probably know, is compressed. Not only compressed, but they take a WAV file, which is your original recorded audio in WAV format. It's uncompressed, full. It's got all the information in it, and then they discard lots of it that they think you're not going to be able to hear anyway, because it's a huge file, and to get it down to a smaller file that's more portable. You have an MP3 or an OGG file.
Interesting.
So that's your audio equivalent. But I don't want the computer to decide what bits and bytes it's going to discard. I want all of that information. And so in photography, if your cell phone, and there are a few cell phones that can shoot in RAW. That's one of the new capabilities some of the phones can do, is shooting in RAW. Now what RAW is it's a file format specific to the type of camera you have that stores all of the photographic data hitting the sensor before it goes into a post-processing routine to turn it into a JPEG. So think of it as the ingredients to bake a cake. All right, so I want all of the ingredients that bake the cake, so that if the final outcome of the cake is unsatisfactory, I can go back in and make the cake again. Okay, but if the camera is only producing the cake and I don't like the result, then I've lost all of the ingredients. I cannot no longer go back and make another cake from the same ingredients.
What file type is it when it's RAW?
It depends on the camera. So in Nikon's case, it's called an NEF file. But it's Nikon's proprietary RAW format that Lightroom can read. But so let me tell you why that's important. So when I first got my first digital SLR, which now Steven owns, it's a Nikon D80. Bought it in May of 2007 to photograph his last year playing volleyball. And I didn't understand the RAW and JPEG. I didn't understand all that. I was just wanted a better camera to take, sports photography. Well, I didn't really, and that was also the summer, as I recall, that we did our beach trip. So I took some family pictures, and they were okay, but I didn't really understand how the camera worked, and I didn't know then what I know now. And I didn't realize until that fall that some images that I took, they were either underexposed or overexposed, or the white balance wasn't good. And you'll probably ask me what white balance is, which we'll get to that. Okay. But that's important to understand why RAW is important, especially white balance. But if I'm underexposed, I take a picture and for some reason the aperture was too small or didn't have enough light and it's really dark, and then I try to brighten it in post-processing, we used to call it, in post-processing. If I try to brighten it up, it's horrible. It's really not much you can do with it, a JPEG, because the cake's already baked. You can put frosting on it and you can do some things, but the cake is already baked.
It's still going to taste bad.
Still going to taste bad. I mean, there's some things you can do to it, but there's a lot of things you can't do to it. If you had a raw image, you had the original ingredients, all of the image data is there, it's intact. It's a big file, which is the disadvantage. You can then, well, I didn't like that JPEG, just throw that away. Let's rebake that cake. And now you can underexpose an image by 1.5 to 2 stops and still pull out some really nice, and I'll show you on the computer some images. The image that I have on display at a gallery in Minnesota, if you saw the JPEG that came out of that, the forest in the front is black. You saw that image in my book.
It's nice,
it's just
beautiful
black.
Mountains and didn't have a lake.
No, it's forest. It's just
I thought
trees
you were
in
talking
front.
about the mountain one.
No, but that forest, if you looked at the JPEG image coming out of the camera, was almost pitch black. And if that had been a JPEG only, there's nothing I can do with it. But because I shot in RAW, I was able to pull out the exposure on that underexposed part of the image.
Is that something you can do in Lightroom, or
do that in Lightroom? You can do that in Lightroom. You can do most of that in Lightroom. So what I figured out in the fall of 2007 was that all of the images that I had taken up till then, the cake had already baked. There was nothing.
So the camera just produced JPEG files?
Yeah, at that time I had my camera set to only produce JPEGs because I didn't understand what RAW files were and why I should bother.
Interesting.
So then after that, now I shoot in RAW only or RAW plus JPEG. So it'll give you 2 files. It'll give you a JPEG that for instant gratification that you can then share, but you also have a RAW file if you don't like the JPEG. I mean, it won't fix focus problems or it won't fix a bad shot, but if it's underexposed or to some extent overexposed or your white balance is bad, it doesn't matter. So let's talk about white balance.
Real quick. Most of the time when you get a new camera, like people get it in their first camera or first nicer camera, is it usually set just to produce JPEGs, or
it depends on the camera.
Depends on the camera.
Depends
so
on
just
the camera.
make sure you check.
Yeah, make sure you check that the camera that you choose to buy, make sure that it will shoot in RAW and that you have it set to shoot at least in RAW. RAW. Now there are some other photographers that will disagree with that, and for some kinds of things they shoot, and that's a whole nother conversation about what formats you.
But yeah, this is your suggestion.
But I would suggest that you shoot everything in RAW. Even if you don't use it, at least you now have it. Because all those images I took for the first 9 months I owned the camera, there's nothing I can do with them now that I understand it and what I can do with it.
So even if you think you're not going to edit
do it anyway, because storage is cheap. Storage is cheap, and that's really
like video storage can be very expensive, or it's a lot harder to store a bunch of videos, which I've learned making these.
And there's also video RAW. You want to shoot video RAW because that way you're capturing more.
I'm actually going to have to look at. I'm pretty sure the video I capture is RAW, but I'm gonna have to look.
So what the cameras do is they take the raw image, because it's coming into the sensor as raw image data, which is just ones and zeros. Okay, at a really fast rate. Okay, it's just coming in really fast. And then what the camera is doing, there's another post-processing chip that then takes that raw image data and either converts it into a raw image file or does additional processing based on certain assumptions to create a JPEG. Okay? Well, I don't want the camera to make those decisions for me. I want the raw file and I'll make those decisions. All right? So that's criteria number 2. It has to be able to shoot raw. And then when you get it, make sure the settings are set so you are shooting in raw. All right? Criteria number, and the only other criteria I have is that you can shoot in manual mode if you wanted to. And most ILC, I don't know any ILC camera that you can't shoot in manual mode. Beyond that, it doesn't matter if it's Canon or Nikon or Fuji or Sony or Olympus, it doesn't matter, because if you can't take a good picture with the cameras that are coming out now, it's not the camera's fault. It really isn't. It's your fault.
I believe you.
So, you know, and if you buy a used one, you know, as a starter camera, you know, you really just those criteria.
So again, we'll go back through them. I'm going to try to track my brain. So the first one was to make sure that you can switch out lenses.
Yeah, ILC.
ILC, interchangeable lens camera.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Second one was, hold on, don't tell me. We just talked about
RAW.
it. Oh yeah, RAW. You want to
Can shoot RAW.
Have RAW
and can shoot manual.
Can shoot RAW and manual.
Yeah.
And then, or that was the third one. The
manual is the third one. Yeah.
Okay.
I don't have any other I mean,
But there's no reason for someone that's just starting to feel like they need to buy a $1,200 camera.
No, you can get a good camera kit lens with a kit lens for probably $500 to $800, and used for even a lot less than that.
Interesting.
A lot less than that, and I would recommend, especially just getting a used camera, it's a couple of years old, that's not cutting edge, and just learn how to use the darn thing.
Work on composition.
Composition is most of it, but learn the technical parts of exposure. Understanding how aperture affects depth of field, how aperture and shutter speed affect exposure, how ISO works. That's a whole another acronym. But you need to understand how those work together. How the three-legged stool of exposure: ISO, shutter speed, and f-stop. How those work together to create a properly exposed image. And then the choices you make with those different settings, depending on what you're shooting. Learn all of that. Also learn about composition, which is whole nother topic. And then you'll learn those things better if you'll shoot in force yourself to learn to shoot in manual mode instead of because most cameras, and another mistake I made for many years with my cameras was put it in some sort of auto, like aperture priority or shutter priority or semi-program mode or even full auto. Huh. And when you do that, you're letting the camera make all those choices for you instead of you making conscious decisions about those things. And then you don't really understand how they work together to create a better image. Does that make sense?
Yeah. So doing a manual would probably work okay, but if you're wanting to be a better photographer, you want
manual.
Oh, you're right. If you're shooting auto, then the camera makes all decisions. If you're shooting manual, that will help you over time be a better photographer. Right. Versus, if you're shooting auto, just your skill cap is kind of
So when you're learning the camera, force yourself to shoot in manual mode, and then later on, if you want to just take a shortcut and say, I know my camera is going to take a good shot at shutter priority because I'm shooting sports. Let the camera make those decisions. Just put it in shutter priority. Boom, rock and roll, and that's fine. But if you rely on those all the time, then you never really understand what this compromise, because the camera's always making compromises in order to get the exposure it thinks it wants.
Interesting. People are showing up, so I know we have to go soon, but I want to talk about real quick. You've been into photography as a real big hobby for 30, almost 40 years now, and you've started getting into galleries. Mm-hmm. When did that start happening?
Well, that was by chance. Last April, Barb and
2017 or no, 2018. 2018, right? It's
April
2019.
Yeah. So Barb and I were traveling with some friends of ours. The guy is also a not professional, but serious amateur photographer, as I am. He shoots Olympus, and so he and I went on a photo, and one of our shore excursions on our cruise was a photo.
Oh,
they went on with a bunch of other people that had cameras, really nice cameras. And there was a lady on the group with us who was also shooting Nikon, and we struck up a conversation. And turns out she owns an art gallery in Minnesota. So
wow, that's
so
cool.
so just striking up a conversation. She said, "Have you ever had any of your work displayed in a gallery for sale?" And I said, "No, I've never."
Just do it for fun.
I do it for fun, and I don't think my stuff is that good. And she said, "Well, why don't you send me some of your stuff, and we'll decide if it's good enough we think it'll sell." Okay, well, what I got to lose, right? So I sent her.
Then you went to your
went to Lightroom
and searched your 5-star photo.
My 5-star photos, different, so I sent her 4 different categories. I sent her wildlife, landscapes, railroad, and there was some like art photography. It's just kind of weird stuff. And she said, "Well, the wildlife that's good stuff, but we have plenty of that here, so that probably won't sell." But she liked my Denali. And she said, "We never posted any railroad images, so that's kind of new for us, so that might work." So we settled in on 3 pictures. I have an investment because I had to actually pay to have them printed on metal. So I've got a couple $100 invested in the process. But I got nothing to lose if they don't sell. They still haven't sold yet. But that was, anyway, so that's how that started, was just a conversation with an art gallery owner. And I still haven't seen those images. I had them printed at the print shop and direct shipped to the gallery in Minnesota.
So all you have is probably a picture of your pictures.
Yeah, that's all I have. That's all I have.
And you said it's a triptych, which is like 3 pictures of your picture.
Yeah.
Trying to explain that, but it's basically your entire picture, but it's separated.
It's broken into 3 12 by 12 pieces. So it's 12 inches tall, 36 inches wide.
I bet that looks awesome on the wall.
So I can't wait to see it.
Yeah.
And the others are 36 inch by 18, or I don't know, 24 by 18, I think is what they are. But they're printed on metal, so they don't need a frame. And she says they look great, but they haven't sold yet.
I bet they do. So. Yeah, I mean, it looks good in the book, which is like a 4 inch by 3 inch, or however big.
So it was just kind of a fun thing, but it made me think that perhaps there are others that might want to buy some of my artwork. So
I mean, you just take the photos. You've been doing it for 30, almost 40 years, and let people decide whether
they want. Yeah.
If they like them, they'll buy them.
But the thing that about photography that's interesting, I think, is that I can post an online image, like on Facebook, or they can go to my gallery in SmugMug or whatever, and they just kind of, oh, that looks nice. It looks really good. But it has but then they go on, and there's like nothing compels them to want to pay $5 to buy it, okay, or to download it. So there's no real compelling anything. But if you print it and frame it, or and put it on a wall, it's like, wow, I'm getting $250 for that.
Yeah, art's still very popular.
It's a very tangible
wall art.
Wall art is not the same thing as
a
display on your
computer. With the internet, I don't think wall art is going away.
I don't think so either. It's
definitely different. I agree, to be able to see it
different
large
experience.
And almost. I mean, you don't want to touch it usually, but to be able to see.
It's much more tangible, much more visceral experience. So anyway, I don't know where that'll go, but it's do
cool
photography.
That you're kind of stepping into that realm. Though. I think that's neat.
So, and you're helping me with the digital.
Thanks for coming. Oh yeah.
Yeah, thank you for.
Thanks for coming on the show. And
sure. Well.
I went to school for art and had 2 or 3 photography classes. And talking to you now, I'm like, man, I know nothing about photography. I know twice as much now as I did.
Well, if you do decide to get into photography just as a hobby, holler.